The order comes down the line to hold formation, and you realize the men beside you have been given spears for the first time in their lives. 3 days ago, your palms are still soft. The wood is not. Somewhere down the line, a man is practicing the same forward thrust over and over. Like if he does it enough times, it will stop feeling foreign in his hands before the enemy line reaches you. You picture Sengoku Japan's foot soldiers as apprentice samurai. Poor, sure, but honorable men. One great battle away from earning armor, a stipend, a place in the warrior class. That picture is wrong, and by the end of this video, you'll understand what it actually costs to be the man standing in front of the samurai, not behind him. You'll understand why almost none of those men ever got a name in the history books. You were pulled from a rice field. Not recruited in the way a soldier today is recruited. Conscripted, more like, or hired on for a single campaign season because a daimyo needed bodies and needed them fast. Most Ashigaru, the foot soldiers of this era, were peasant farmers first, fighting the seasonal work layered on top of a life that still revolved around planting and harvest, timed around the rhythms of rice cultivation rather than around war. A campaign might pull you away from your fields right as the planting season demanded your labor at home, and you had no say in the timing of either. So what training did you actually get before they put a weapon in your hands? Often almost none. Enough to hold a spear in formation. Enough to thrust forward on command and not break rank the first time you heard screaming. Not enough to fight as an individual, because you were never meant to. Your yari might run several meters long. Some Ashigaru spear units carried shafts far longer than a man's height. Unwieldy things whose only real purpose was to be swung or thrust in unison. A wall of points moving as one body, rather than individual weapons in individual hands. And here's the detail that undercuts the whole fantasy. The word samurai itself was used loosely in this period, but foot soldiers were never counted among them. You were not a junior samurai waiting your turn. You were something else entirely, and that distinction was about to define everything that happened to you. So if you're not a samurai, and you're not really a soldier in the way we'd recognize one, what exactly are you to the army you're standing in? The honest answer is property, more than personnel. You had no guaranteed land, no stipend that carried past the fighting season, no lasting bond to the lord whose banner you marched under. When the campaign ended, your standing could evaporate overnight. No contract promised you next season's pay. No formal tie bound your lord to you the way it bound him to his samurai retainers. In almost every case, required hereditary lineage or formal service recognition earned over generations. You had neither, and no single battle was going to hand it to you. So what was actually keeping you in that formation, spear in hand, when the man beside you might vanish back to his farm the moment the fighting stopped? Partly obligation to the local lord, who controlled the land your family worked, partly the simple fact that refusing wasn't really an option. There was no ladder here. There was a line, and you were standing in it because someone above you needed a wall of bodies, and you happened to be available. Now look at what they put on your back. Daimyo issued mass-produced, cut-rate armor called Okashi Gusoku, loaner armor, built cheap and built uniform, so thousands of men could be equipped fast without individual fitting or craftsmanship. Rows of identical helmets, identical breastplates, stamped out so an entire unit could be armored in the time it once took to fit a single samurai for his own. But loaner is the operative word. That armor was never yours. It belonged to the Lord's arsenal. Tracked, reissued, reclaimed like inventory after every campaign, stripped off the living and the dead alike, and handed to the next man in line. Your weapon was the same story. Standardized, basic, built for cost and numbers rather than for keeping you alive. By the mid-1500s, some Ashigaru units carried something new entirely, the Tanegashima, the matchlock arquebus introduced through Portuguese traders in 1543 and adopted with startling speed by Japanese armies. At the Battle of Nagashino in 1575, ranks of Ashigaru guns fired from behind wooden palisades against charging cavalry, a documented turning point in how these wars were fought, and proof of exactly how disposable and interchangeable the men holding those guns were meant to be. You were not trained as a marksman with a craft to master. You were trained to stand in your row, fire when the man in front of you had already reloaded, and let the volley do what your individual skill never could. So your armor isn't yours. Your training barely covered the basics, and you're standing in a line built entirely out of interchangeable men. What happens the moment the fighting actually starts? You find out you were never meant to survive it by skill. Ashigaru carrying long spears, the Yari, were formed into the front ranks of the battle line. That was the whole point of you. Your job was to absorb the initial clash, to be the wall the enemy hit first, so that mounted samurai behind you could watch for openings and exploit them once the lines buckled. You were the shock absorber, and the numbers reflect exactly that. Casualty rates among these frontline conscripts ran disproportionately higher than among the mounted armored warriors riding safely behind you. When that wall breaks, what's waiting for the men who make it through? Rice, if you're lucky, and mud most of the time. Pay for foot soldiers was irregular at best, often handed out in rice rations rather than any dependable wage you could count on season to season. A fistful of onigiri, maybe a smear of miso paste, whatever the supply lines managed to push forward that week. Campaign life meant long marches, thin food supply, disease spreading through camp faster than any enemy blade, and next to no medical care waiting for you if you were wounded and still breathing. And if you died out there, in a skirmish nobody remembers the name of, on a road between two provinces, there was no institutional guarantee that anyone buried you properly, let alone recorded that you existed at all. No pay you could rely on. No protection worth the name. No guarantee anyone would remember you even been there. So was there truly no way out of this life? Was the door completely sealed? Not completely. There's one name that breaks the pattern. And it's the reason this story gets told at all. Toyotomi Hideyoshi. This isn't legend. It's documented history. He began his life among the peasant class, and by most accounts of his early service to the warlord Oda Nobunaga, he started as little more than a low attendant, a sandal bearer, the man who held his lord's footwear and waited outside while decisions were made without him. From that starting point, he rose to become one of the men who unified Japan, one of the most powerful figures the country produced in this entire era. If this shakes what you thought you knew about class and feudal Japan, stay with this, because what he did next is the part that actually explains why nobody else got to follow him. His rise is remembered precisely because it was so rare, a documented outlier, not a path that was ever open to the men standing in formation around you. And here's the turn that makes his story land differently than you'd expect. In 1588, Hideyoshi issued the katanagari, the sword hunt, formally disarming the peasant class and hardening the line between warrior and farmer into something far more rigid than it had ever been. Villages were made to surrender their swords, spears, and firearms on the stated justification that the metal would be melted down and repurposed for the construction of a great statue of Buddha. A pious framing over what was, in practical terms, the permanent disarmament of the class he had come from. He closed the very door he had climbed through. So the one success story you've heard of is also the man who made sure it could never happen again. What does that mean for everyone else standing in that line with you? It means the wall you were part of only got thicker. After Hideyoshi's reforms, movement between peasant and warrior status became far more controlled, far more rigid than it had been in the chaos of earlier decades. The vast majority of Ashigaru, who fought and bled through the Sengoku campaigns, left no individual record behind them. No promotion, no land grant, no family name carried forward into the history books. Your labor, your body, the wall you formed at the front of 1,000 battles you can't name, that's what built the unification historians now credit almost entirely to the commanders who rode behind you. The generals get the biography, you get the body count. Think about the last time you told yourself, if I just work hard enough, I'll be the exception. The Ashigaru believed that too. Some of them must have watched Hideyoshi's rise, or heard of it secondhand, and thought, maybe me next. but the odds were built against almost every single one of them, deliberately, by the very system that let one man through. You are not weak for wanting out of a system stacked against you. That's not a character flaw. That's what it means to be human inside a structure designed to keep most people exactly where they started. So was he, before the door closed behind him. The Sengoku battlefield wasn't a ladder anyone could climb. It was a machine that needed disposable men at the front, so a handful of names could rise at the top. And the one story we remember, Hideyoshi's, is the exception that proves just how locked the system really was. This wasn't fiction. This was somebody's whole life.